If you have followed the rules but feel unsatisfied with where that's gotten you, this podcast is for you.
We'll help you learn how to reach your goals through creativity, intuition, and flow.
Welcome to the Flow into Authenticity podcast. Hello, welcome everybody. We are so excited to be here today, and we have our very first guest to the podcast, Bryn Gribben, and we're so excited to talk with Bryn today. Unfortunately, Allison is sick today, so will not be here. But Leslie, how are you doing?
I am doing okay. How about you?
Okay.
How are you? And that's all I have to say about that. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm doing actually pretty well. I got diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm currently taking meds and seeing how that's going.
Oh, wow.
So we're finding focus.
Excellent. So
I'm going to introduce Bryn, and I'm going to read a little bit of her bio. So, let me just ask you, Bryn, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you.
Before I introduce you, I'll ask you.
My meditation app for them this morning had to log my mood, and I was just above content. So perfect.
Oh, beautiful. That's a good skill. Well, I just want to kind of touch back on what we've been talking about in our podcast here. So we've been talking about feeling stuck, like if you've ever felt stuck in your life, if you feel stuck right now, maybe in your job or relationship or anywhere in your life, your creativity, your creative process, and how to get unstuck, how to move into more of a fulfilling life, more of what you love doing, what you are passionate about, and how do we get from, feeling stuck into that kind of purposeful life. And so what we are excited to do on this podcast is have people come on like Bryn and be able to share their stories. So we've kind of shared our stories, but we are so excited to have Bryn on. So let me just share a little bit of her bio. So Bryn Gribben is a poet and essayist living in Seattle, Washington with 2 cats and a love song of a partner. Hailing from Kansas, Gribben holds a master's degree in cultural studies and women's studies from Kansas State University and a PhD in Victorian literature from the University of Washington. She was an assistant professor of British literature at Northwest Missouri State and the co-editor of fiction for the Laurel Review before returning to Seattle to teach the last several years at Seattle University. She left her senior lecturer position in December of 2021 to explore the world of antiques and to launch her first book, congratulations, a memoir about music and intimacy entitled Amplified Heart, an Emotional Discography. Bryn is currently working on a book of poems about the painter Simeon Solomon, enjoying her new non-academic jobs and planning her July wedding. Welcome, Bryn.
Welcome, Bryn.
Thank you so much.
So excited to have you.
Thank you so much.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your role this is how we kind of met you at Seattle U. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there as just kind of a initial start to an introduction?
Thanks, Esther. Sure. And one thing to say is that Allison, I've met Esther and now Leslie through Allison. Allison and I are colleagues, or we're colleagues from SU. She's in a different department than me, but I felt a kinship because we simply enjoy people and we have really a high love of the aesthetic, like beauty. And so at SU, I was at SU for about 14 years. I came back by choice. And I think that this is one of the really key things about my story is that I had done the PhD. I'd felt very secure as an English major. Like I was encouraged by my professors. I was valued by my undergraduate professors. Grad school is its own bag of cats, and I made it through. But I'd always felt like I was on the right path. I loved being an English major. I wrote my religion paper my senior year of college about how really my religion was literature, like the skills that literature gave me were what my highest values were: empathy, understanding, and appreciation of struggle. And so when I got a tenure track job, I already felt like I was doing big, hard things. So I moved to Missouri by myself. And I was there for 2 years, and I actually really loved my colleagues. And that's also key to my story, is that I had an experience of a department that was really supportive and connected. And I still felt like I was on the correct path. I just, as a single woman, was in this very small town. I had a long distance relationship that had to end. And I thought, I'm going to die alone here. Like, this is not enough for me in terms of energy. Like, I really would feel like when I would go to another city, I would feel the battery of my life getting recharged. And the town was just too slow for me. So I was like, okay, well, then it's just about that. And I left, and my colleagues and I had a good party, and it was sad. And I had taught a year at Seattle U before I left. So I, by choice, came back with the understanding that in so many ways I was closing the door on a whole part of my career. And that was my old chair's fear when I left Missouri. He said, I'm just worried you're going to kill your career. But all my other colleagues were like, no, she's not. She's going to have a great life. She's going to do her stuff. She's going to get to teach at Seattle, where she loves. And that was what happened for years. Like I tell people now, I said, I loved my job until I just didn't. And that started happening about 5 years ago, really. What happened was, in part, I actually was still on the right path in terms of I'd been promoted to senior lecturer. I definitely had posses of students who would follow me from class to class. And I had made many interdepartmental friendships. And that was key for me also, was that I felt for a long time like I was a known quantity, and I felt valuable among the bigger community of Seattle U. Part of what started to happen was departmental culture shifted, which is a key thing for many people. I think that the departments just changed. There was less of a connectedness. Like people were very protective of their time, which I totally understand. And they often would say, I don't have the bandwidth for this. And then it seemed to, like with that change, the conversations changed, and I wasn't having as many conversations about things that I was really passionate about anymore. I wasn't talking to colleagues about books or about their projects, or if they would talk about it, they felt often like they couldn't talk about it for very long. Like they're like, well, but I mean, I know it's not very interesting. And I'm like, well, to you probably, or I'm like, yeah, it actually really is. I also felt like more and more my conversations were being held behind closed doors, that people didn't want other people to know things about them. Like there was a real like closed door kind of feeling, which in one way could read as boundaries, in another, it can feel just like you're just shutting people out. And then a key thing for me also, I'd actually had a really frightened student. And I eventually got it brought to the dean of students. And at that upper level also, I had this moment of being shut out where I was saying, I just don't feel safe with the student in my class. And it was a white male. So like in so many ways, I thought I was following some protocols there about like checking privilege. And they were like, well, do you have a good therapist? And I'm like, yeah, like basically that they were kind of like, well, we need to give him a chance to change. And it sounds like you're taking this really personally, but rather than feeling supported, then I felt like they were like, so go talk to your therapist about it. And then that just kind of like triggered a lot of things for me in terms of understanding how actually little I was valued at my school. Because I think, again, like through no fault of some people's, it just was that healthy self-image I had of myself was still there, but I was just starting to realize how blind I'd been to some things. So I worked really hard on fitting in. I tried for several years to like become part of the values of the school. So the school really values social justice. And many of my colleagues were very invested in faculty senate. And that wasn't my skill set. Like I wanted to be part of those conversations. I taught service learning classes on empathy. I changed some course topics to better fit the school mission statement. And I tried to expand my reading, but I still felt like there was this way that I wasn't getting to talk about the things that I really cared about, like empathy, actually, like beauty, like other modes to justice other than just talking about representation all the time. Because I actually think like my most successful classes by the end were my creative nonfiction classes, where really giving students the quote unquote selfish chance to write about themselves, I thought did open their eyes to different ways of being empathetic and different ways of being just. So you can kind of hear me even now trying to say, like, SU, I was trying to give you what you wanted, right? I hear it, but I just didn't feel like I was part of my colleagues anymore. Like I felt more and more. And so like a key moment was I announced that I was engaged and that I had a book coming out in my department meeting. And there were a couple, it was on Zoom, and there were like a couple of clap emojis, but only a couple of people privately wrote me to say congratulations. And that was really hurtful. And that was when, again, I thought, even if everybody's really tapped out, I think I need to be somewhere else. This is not a good fit for me anymore.
So
that was a lot, I know. But.
Thank you for sharing all of. No, I think that will resonate with a lot of people. And what I'm hearing from you is that the environment was not a good fit for you, what the things that you valued, and that you might have been just feeling stuck because you're trying to make yourself fit into that, but it clearly wasn't working for either party. It wasn't working for you, and it wasn't working for your colleagues. So I heard you just mention, like, you kind of were like, oh, maybe this is not the right fit for me. Can you talk about how did you let yourself start thinking about what else might be out there for you? And was there something specific that was kind of nudging you to make a change? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think too, like one thing I'd want to emphasize for any younger listeners would be, we're not talking like just a couple of years of me thinking about this. Like, again, like one of the things you need to do, I think, if you are starting to have these questions about your job and your fit, is to do that check of how many of your needs are still being met, right? So for a long time, even after things started kind of going south for me, I thought, but I still get to talk to many people every day. Like I value lots of interactions. I'm an extrovert. I get to talk to a lot of people about things I love. I am a strong female adult mentor for many of my female students, particularly. So I kept doing this kind of value check where I was like, I am still needing these things. I liked that I would not teach every day, that I would have days of just work. That's like what one of my colleagues said. He's like, oh, I love weekends because I can just work. But like as a teacher, you do need days to just get some stuff done, right? So I liked the flexibility of the schedule. I think what started to happen, a nudge, was that I started giving more time to my creative work, my creative writing. And the more that I got published, the more I started taking that part of myself seriously. That I thought and I'd always known that I had many worlds going. Like I had many worlds outside of SU going. Like any party you'd come to at my house, people would be like, there are always like several new people I always meet at those parties. I started taking that part of myself more seriously. But I also am friends with other teachers at other universities and other schools who were just much more connected to their faculty, to their colleagues. So my best friend and my partner both teach at a private high school on the East Side, for example. And in so many ways, like I would go to their department parties and feel more connected than I did to my own. So knowing that it was possible to have a healthier work environment was important, like seeing that was out there. And then reminding myself that I have these other passions that, even if they weren't being seen as potentially very valuable to the department, like were really feeding me. That was important for me. You know, at one point, a colleague said, well, you don't have to like everybody you work with. And I knew that that wasn't true for me in that moment. Like that was a nudge for me too, just hearing certain phrases and hearing the truth of them for some people and feeling the deep untruth of them for myself were strong nudges.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear like how connected you are to your intuition and your values in that way, because I know that a lot of people really struggle with that, especially women, you know, people who might have grown up in our culture. And so
do you know why, Esther?
Why?
I think this is central to my story. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people in Western Kansas. Very small, right? My graduating class was 38. I was in school the same, you know, I had the same people in my class from kindergarten to high school. And I had an awesome mother. And maybe this is simplistic, but I think just looking around me and not feeling like, I would be like, why are these people doing these things? Why do they want these things? I don't. And mom's like, it's totally great to not want those things. Like basically the outsider dimension that so many people struggle with as a teenager. And potentially this is a little haughty of me, but I was just like, yeah, that's not my life. That's not what I want.
See, that is so important. And we've talked about this a lot, role models or expanders. And I think like this is something that Allison really has really strongly too, I think in her mother. And I see that in like people who are able to really be strong in themselves, but we can find that in other people if we don't have that in our family as well. And like, I hear you saying like, I found role models or expanders, you could call them expanders in people who were in other positions. And I saw them liking their work environment, and something in me, it triggered something in me that said like, okay, I'm not happy here. Right. Yeah. And so that's a really great way for people who are listening to kind of see like, okay, if I observe, like maybe sometimes people observe like friends who are in positions that they seem happier and they might be jealous.
Yeah.
Right. But we can look at those people and be like, oh, actually, that's what I want. I want those connections. That's important to me. That's a value of mine, you know?
Well, jealousy is a really interesting word to bring up because I'm a profoundly non-jealous person.
Yeah.
Qualities is that I am always capable of taking joy in somebody else's joy. I don't need it to be about me. And so I think that word jealousy is again, a sign that you're being inauthentic in some way to yourself. Yeah. Because it means that you think somebody's got some trick that you don't have.
It's a lack mentality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And see, again, like that's what drove me away from my department was the kind of scarce. And this is something a lot of humanities departments suffer from. Like there is no shortage of jobs for English majors. That has always been a lie, a myth. And yet humanities departments still, I think, go into scarcity mindset where they were like, oh, well, we've got to stay on the defensive about why we're important. And since I did think what I was doing was important, it was always a whiplash sensation for me to try to accommodate these things that I didn't think were actually fully helpful to take on emotionally, you know. And the intuition thing, though, yes, I mean, so many people doubt their intuition or didn't get a chance to develop it because they were told that they were like unrealistic or whatever. You know, my father and I have a difficult relationship in some ways. And I kind of got mixed messages. Like definitely he thought I was spacey, but then he also was like, but he recognized that I was really who I was. So, you know, like he didn't necessarily always support who I was in a bigger sense, but he got that that's who I was and that some of my choices were just going to be different. And I didn't always feel, again, like that. I didn't feel like anybody was shoving that down in me. So I'm very lucky. And then when I went to college, right away, I had an English professor. I was a biology major at first. because smart girls were
Oh,
supposed to major
wow.
in science. I know.
I love biology too. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I was only good at going to Dairy Queen after the lab tests. That's what I learned about being a biology major. And so my English professor, she said, "Hey, you're really good at this." And I said, "At what?" I was like, "Who can't read and write when they go to college?" Because again, small town high school, not a particularly like strong snapshot of what the profession actually would be, right? And so she just identified skills for me that I didn't realize were skills, like the ability to analyze, the ability to close read. So that was something I took into my workplace, like as a teacher. I was like, okay, sometimes people just don't even know what they have. So that's what I'm going to bring them. And so I was always very intentional about telling my students, we're really good at this. This is
That's
a skill.
beautiful.
This
Yes.
is a skill.
And
right?
we need that. We need each
We do
other
need that.
to mirror, because especially if we didn't grow up with that, that's why it's great to have a coach or a therapist or a teacher, somebody who can see that in us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't always have language is key, but you don't always have that ability. And I think this is why maybe like now so many people do doubt their intuition because, well, I don't know, like studies, like I read some study or I heard it on Hidden Brain or something that intuition is actually it's not always true. Like it can also be like a way of just feeling like something's right because it's familiar. But I think again, like if you have been intentional about like, if you've been self-aware about like why you love some of the things you love, I think that can help pull you back into an honest place. Right?
I have a lot to say about this because I feel like, so what I hear you saying, and Leslie, feel free to jump in here because I know your story ties in a lot with this, but like what I hear you saying, like, I feel like life asks us to grow and expand into our most authentic self. So hearing your story, it's like life was like nudging you. Okay, I want to actually express more of my writing, more of myself, right? And so in my perspective, our intuition is actually like a GPS that guides us to our most authentic self-expression, and it like helps us to grow and expand. So fear, on the other hand, it can act like intuition in a way, but our intuition, if we really listen, it actually leads us to that expansion. So fear can be like, our intuition can tell us something like, okay, Bryn, like, go ahead and try to get something published. But our fear can then jump in and sort of act like intuition and actually bring us back to our comfort zone.
And so it's a muscle.
Our fear can kind of act like, oh no, I just want to, kind of, I'm getting the intuition of kind of waiting or settling or whatever, but that's not actually your intuition. It's more like your comfort zone, right? So your intuition can be actually scary.
Yes, and it's what you nourish, right? Because again, I think I see that even in some of the people I'm really close to who I love, like the more they give. I told a former student once, I said, she was trying to choose between jobs. And she's like, well, what should I do? Should I do this or should I do that? And I said, well, what is it that you really love doing? And she goes, speaking Spanish. Like one job was an interpreter and one was elementary school teacher. And I said, then I would take the translator job because once you start making these choices that are a little counterintuitive, they breed more counterintuitive choices.
Yes.
Right? So that
100%
start feeling like intuition. But again, it's because you've been nourishing or punishing yourself in particular ways over and over.
Yeah.
Again.
Like Leslie, you have that example of, feeling like, okay, I need to do a more logical job with my writing,
Yeah. I love hearing that because when I'm listening to you, Bryn, I'm just like, wow, you really know how to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And that has helped you be able to make those shifts and really attune to what you need. And I think that is, like you're saying, I mean, that is something that takes practice. And I love that you're encouraging students to do that, to really follow those nudges. And like, you know, what we've talked a lot on this podcast about exploration and play, and like what brings you joy, and just, you know, lean into that a little bit. And it's very difficult, I think, to let go of the shoulds and the conditioning of no, this is like, it's, you know, this is what I should be doing, right? Like you said earlier, you know, smart girls study science, right? Like it's just, we don't give ourselves permission. And so when sometimes we lean into the fear instead of leaning into the curiosity. So we can figure out what that inspiration is. So it's inspiring to hear you talk about your journey.
Yeah, well, you know, really again, like, I mean, I know I'm kind of saying a lot. I feel like I'm kind of like all over the place, but just to simplify really, again, this nudge impulse, I think the fact that I have allowed myself to have many moments where I have made strong choices. Like, I mean, like I chose to come back to Seattle U. I chose to leave it. I chose to go to Missouri by myself. I chose to leave it. And like that choice of leaving that job was one of the most empowering things I've ever done, because that was the real first leap. It was getting off the track of the academic tenure track, because you're told that you are ungrateful and potentially like killing your career if you do that. And I had this duty to myself that I felt really strongly about. And my practice for that leap, I think, was allowing myself to fall in love many times. Like I hear again, like so much fear when I talk to people about love relationships, that I just keep thinking, I'm like, I know the world can be frightening, and I know that people can be hurtful, but like people are also so fascinating. Like that's part of my book that's coming out, is like, I really am so like, writing that book was just like one gratitude exercise after another, where I would write about painful, hard things and still go, that was a good experience. Like that felt meaningful. And I am glad I did that. And so I had built up this muscle of trusting myself that like, even if something was really hard, it was going to be okay. Even if something was maybe not a great choice, it's still going to be okay. Like, you know, students are really stuck in perfectionism, where they're like, I have to get right the first time. And I'm like, well, that's going to be a hard life for you. Like,
especially now, I feel like now that there's an answer to everything with Google, the internet, I feel like there's so much more of that. Okay, well, there's one answer. I love that you built up this grit of, okay, I am making a choice. And I think that's so important. It's like, we have to actually make the choice.
You have
for
to.
our intuition to be able to kind of guide us along the way. We have to take a step. Like that's non-negotiable. So so in our first kind of like framework here, like when we kind of go from feeling stuck, like when you were at SU and you were feeling stuck, what was kind of some things that you started playing with? Because when the first step is finding inspiration. So what were the things that you kind of, a lot of that has to do with connecting to yourself, connecting to your intuition, exploring options. So when you started feeling like, oh, I gotta leave, like, no, this is serious. What were the things that kind of went through your head of like, okay, what should I start exploring now that I have to leave? Would love to hear that.
I think, you know, if any of you are practitioners of any kind of meditation, this will sound very familiar. I mean, like that's part of it. And I know that that's almost like a cliche, but I don't care. Like, I felt profound. I'd done yoga for many, many years, and I'd always been ahead. Like I'm not a very body person, right? Like, so it took me a long time to kind of connect with my body in terms of, and then I started practicing meditation more regularly when we were during quarantine, which just gave me a lot of physical clues about how bad this environment was feeling for me. Like, and what's my breathing like? I'm not. What is my body feel? And then I had a really great moment, and I told you all about this before we started recording. My partner's also a teacher, and he's more of a worrier than I am. Like, I'm the free spirit, Rick's the planner. And we both just started, like, I'd be like, Rick, we cannot talk all day about things that are driving us crazy. So we started saying the word avocado as like a shut-off point when we were being too negative. And we were saying it a lot. Like, there was guacamole every day, right? And I was like, this is not good. And like, just the number of times where I would go, is this worth, there are two ways to think about this. Like, some people, and this happened after I turned 42, like some of my friends were like, I just don't have any more fucks to give. And I'm a lot more, but I'm a gentler person, basically. Like, I've never been like, I don't feel empowered when I'm feeling like dismissive. That doesn't feel good for me. But I thought, there are other things that I want to talk to people about than how angry I am or how upset I am or how hurt I am. There are other things. And even if I'm making the wrong choice, right? The wrong quote unquote choice, like, I will feel better. And my precursor to that, like, again, talk about experiences training you. Like, I had a really deep love relationship at the end of my 20s where we were just not a good fit. And I broke up with him and broke up with him and broke up with him. And we kept trying because we were both great people. And one day I would walk to school on the Burt Gilman Trail to UW. And every day I would go, I'm a truthful person. Why do I feel like I'm not being truthful? Why do I feel like, and just going, this is how I see myself. This is not how I'm behaving or feeling. Like, eventually the weight of that just pushed me forward. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes people make choices because it feels great. Sometimes you make a choice because you just can't stand the feeling of not feeling like yourself anymore. And that's what happened for me with SU too, was that moment again of feeling dismissed, like having my book and my engagement kind of feel very minimalized. Like, when I was feeling so much joy, I was like, this is not right. This doesn't feel good. And so then with looking forward, a leap has to sometimes be into a void. Like, I think you can't always trust that you're going to like jump and then land on the other side of the crevasse, because
you don't know
don't know. I just knew that what I could do outside of like my job was still probably going to be good. Like, that I have skills. And actually even teaching online, like my partner would come into the room because we're both teaching online, and he would hear me in my classes, and then he'd come in and he'd go, you are a really good teacher. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm very extroverted. He goes, no, seriously. He's like, you are a really good teacher because I can hear that. I can see that. And, my classes aren't like that. So,
wow.
But I knew, that other people were seeing it, that I had.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of a low level thing, but I worked at this clothing store off and on for like 25 years or something. Like, they're like my other family, and they were kind of like my cheers, like where, like whenever I would come back, even if it was just like for one day a year, they'd be like, Brittany's here. Like, the fact that they would freak out, like, that people are so overjoyed when I go into other environments to see me and to have my work valued like that. I was like, so maybe I am actually working part-time there again now, just to like, so.
Yeah. So you started taking note. What I'm hearing is you started taking note of the things about you that you appreciated, that other people appreciated, that you were good at, even if it's something like working at that clothing store. Now you're working at an antique store, right?
Yeah, I love that so much.
Yeah, and that you love it and it fulfills you. So taking note of all these things.
Yeah. And again, and letting go of, my friend Sonora, who's also an SU colleague, is really fond of like, there was a book, He's Just Not That Into You, but then there's another book called like, Face It, You Weren't That Into Him Either, or something like that. And you do have to keep that in mind too, because like, I thought, I knew these things that I valued about me were not potentially some things that other people found valuable, but you had to keep going, yeah, but how much do I need to care about like what do I find valuable about that person? And part of my letting go process actually was my therapist did have me write a forgiveness letter to the person who I found most difficult. And it's a step by step. It's very scaffolded. It really it asks you to say to this person, what the things that what hurt you, but also what the valuable things about them are, so that you could be, again, reinforcing that idea of it's not that this person's a terrible person, which I never thought anyway, but what was valuable about that person? What is it about those things that are valuable about them that prohibit them from saying the things that are valuable about you? And I was that was very helpful. And then you had to write a process letter after that to process the emotions that came up for you during that letter. So, that's a really interesting way of thinking about being nudged towards creativity, is to remind yourself of why the environment that you're leaving just doesn't have space for some of those things. Having a couple of other environments that I knew were positive was a safe move too. But again, I think, just my love life really prepared me in so many ways to make career shifts. So,
yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think that love and career are connected in that way of, having us step into who we are and really embrace that.
I'm sorry, Leslie, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, what I love in listening to your story is I'm hearing you, we've talked about how you obviously know how to trust yourself very well, and you've been practicing that for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And while you may have not known where you're going to land, you're just when you're talking about when you're walking to school on the train, you're I know I don't want to be here. I don't necessarily know where I'm going to be, but I know this isn't it. So I'm going to follow that because I'm going to trust myself to know that I will get where I need to be. And I just think that's an encouraging reminder to other people who maybe aren't or are just in the beginning of learning how to identify their intuition and learning how to trust that, and not get too sucked into the fear part of it that maybe is trying to keep us comfortable.
Because otherwise you just triage. If you don't jump, if you don't leave, then you are triaging all the time. You're coping. And you're
justifying. What are you justifying, listeners? What are you justifying out there?
Yes. And listeners, if you find yourself having a safe word to shut off your negative thinking, you could also just not have the things that are causing the negative thinking. Yeah. I think, right. That's really, the triaging thing. Because again, this is what we tell, students often are well, this makes me unhappy. This makes me uncomfortable. And therefore I will abandon it immediately. And I think that's very unhealthy for a young person, because you do need to have a range of experiences under your belt so that you know how you can manage some things. You need to know you do have the capacity to have some coping mechanisms.
Have some grit. Yeah.
Your life shouldn't become coping.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about how you were finding some inspiration and how you were starting to open up to possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the unexpected things that happened that you couldn't have foreseen? And how did some of those assumptions maybe that you had come true or not come true?
Well, I have a great story for this, because one of the reasons Allison and I connected, I think, is we really love beauty and beautiful things. Allison's home is exquisite. I think my own home is also exquisite. And so even if it feels shallow, pay attention to those things that really feed you and bring you joy, right? I love little things. I love antiques. And so one of the things I did right away when I quit my job, and you will feel this moment of okay, I did that. But I started just going to some of my favorite antique stores, and I was I'm just going to visually treat myself. So in terms of where am I feeling myself going, right? I've always been a word person, but I'm but the visual gives me great pleasure. So I'm going to indulge in that a little bit. And we were talking 2 weeks into January, I walked into my favorite antique store, which is Epic Antique. It's in Soto. And I just casually said to one of the people working there, I said, I love it here. I just quit my job and I want to explore antiques. And he said, oh, do you want to work here? Here, go talk to Jackie. And I literally walked into the
Oh my gosh.
Wow. That's amazing.
But you have to say, right? The gods don't answer closed lips, is what a tarot card reader told me once. Like, you just have to say it.
Open up.
Yeah.
Open open.
So that is literally an assumption I did make. And again, I think some of my former colleagues would think this is really like egotistical of me, but like, I do assume that people will want to help me. Like, and if they don't, that's fine too. You know, I actually had another friend who was a very driven career woman in TV. And she said, oh, I'm really good at doing things for myself because I never expect anybody will want to help me. And I'm like, wow, I am the opposite. Like, it's not, but I won't wait until somebody helps me. Right. And so again, another key thing and another assumption, a negative assumption I have about myself is that I'm not ambitious. And that is something my therapist and I talk about a lot. And she was like, well, that is patently untrue. You have a PhD, you have a book coming out.
Yeah,
you've done all these things. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it's that I don't feel like I'm always hustling, right? But my form of hustle is interpersonal relationships. And right? And so that assumption wasn't just grounded on privilege or like egotism. It was based on these past experiences where, like, because I have given to others and I am open with others, there are some people who greet that back. Not everybody, but like enough that I feel like there's a pattern. And so that was an assumption, was that like, I will find something, it will be something I am interested in. Somebody will help me. All those things were true. And my friend, Rebecca Hooves, who's the director of Seattle Arts and Lectures, she has long been a Bryn supporter. And I get regular emails from her where she's like, here's a coach you might want to check out, which, by the way, I did go to a life coach right away. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to fix this, right? I'm going to find my new thing right away. And I went to this life coach for a session. And then guess what? At the end of the session, she goes, you know, you can use me if you want, but
you already know.
You need me. Yeah. She's like, it seems like you really understand yourself pretty well. And like, she goes, I actually don't see you as part of the great resignation, which, you know, that's what they're calling this time post-COVID. She goes, it just sounds like you were just ready to go and that you needed a change. Yeah. And so, I mean, and that the antiques job is so much fun. And I interact with all the dealers every day. And like, they ask my opinion on things. And, you know, like one of my first weeks there, I did this display of blue glass. They're like, can you just put this stuff in a cabinet? And I did it. And like all day, the other employees were like, that is my favorite display here. And I was like, you know, like, so leaning into the visual has been great. And like this chapbook of poems that I've been working on, like an assumption I made that hasn't exactly proven true is that I would spend more time writing. I haven't written a goddamn thing since January because I've been working at these new jobs, you know, because Epic has 2 stores, Vintage and Epic, and I'm at both of those. I'm looking at this clothing store job also. So like, I'm busy. And my book is more about, at this point, my book is more about like meeting with my editor and looking at book cover designs.
Right. Like I say, I tell a lot of creatives is that it's a different process. There's a different time in the process. So there's always, like, when you're starting a job or when you're moving or when you're grieving or when you're in a different time in the creative process, it looks different, right? It might not look like you are writing a bunch, producing.
It's that you're maybe productivity narrative.
You're creating that display, that visual display actually leads somehow into your creative process. And I think that's so beautiful for you to be able to open up to the possibility of, okay, I can have income in this different way that doesn't have to be attached to my writing. It's so beautiful. And I love people to hear that because, like, I love to tell people, figure out what you need, what you want, figure out how you want to feel in your next job that's going to support you, what you need, what skills you need, how much time you need to create, and then open up. Like open up to where it could come. And I love that you just walked into
Don't you love that?
that and you were just like, yeah, let's do it, you know? So that I think it could happen in any way. And I just love hearing that story because that's one of the things I'm passionate about is helping people to find their next job, their like bridge job, you know? So our last kind of wrap up is the last step in the framework is working it. So working it. So after you kind of, you know, did the exploration of finding your inspiration, letting go of assumptions, opening up to the possibilities of what could be, how do you feel like you're sort of working it right now? And what are you working on right now in your process, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, you know, this was actually the question that in some ways I got a little nervous about because I had that productivity narrative moment where I was like, oh, but like, am I doing anything right now other than just, and what has been an assumption that has been, has been untrue has been that I thought that I would do this for a little bit. And then by March, I would have found like an entirely new career. Like I basically thought, I was still thinking in school terms. I was like, I'll take a quarter off and then I will enter seriously into a new job. And that is a new career path. And because I'm planning a wedding, like there is some exigency with money, like where I was like, okay, I need to keep making money for this wedding. I was going to say stupid wedding, but it's a great wedding. But Rick and I sat down, you know, like last week and we looked at our wedding budget just to check in and we're fine. We are so fine. And part of the reason I did go back into the clothing store business was that they offered me an additional raise because I'm like the oldest person there at this point. Like I've worked there for so long that like I make more than you would, right, at a retail job. And the owner just really cares about me. Like they've been there for me for years. And so part of my working it right now has been knowing that it's okay, as in the movie The Graduate, to just lay by the pool for a while. That like, this is a point of simply recovery and repair, right? Like for sure, I needed that. When I started working at Epic, I would have these moments where the boss would say like, oh, I need to tell you something. And I would clench up and I would get a tear in my eye because I was worried about what he was going to say. And then it was nothing. Or I'd get an email from work and I would again, like just the fact that I don't fear my emails anymore. I'm like, the fact that I can now just get an email and not feel that.
Oh my gosh. We hold it in our body. I'm finding that too. Yeah. We hold that sort of trauma in our body. Yeah.
And I love hearing this, I can't exactly remember what you just said about laying by the pool, but I feel like you've just illustrated that you're just flowing into authenticity, right? Like, I mean, you're really, you're just like, it's part of a deal. Like you can't be at level 10 all the time.
You can't.
Yeah, so I think that that's really important. And I have loved hearing your whole story. It has been such a delight to chat with you. And I think you are a true inspiration. And I hope our listeners can also find the inspiration in your story, because I think, you know, you've just really demonstrated what it is to trust yourself and stay open to possibilities, let go of some assumptions, and work it. You're doing it.
Work it. And really know that, again, like I do worry. I mean, I do have some fears about like what's next, like where I'm like, how long? Because, you know, like there are days where I'm like, I just don't think this is probably going to be a long term, right? But the book coming out.
Yeah, talk about the book.
Yes,
that was a nice moment for me. But that helps me validate, if I needed to validate this kind of period of just laying by the pool a little bit. Yeah. I'm laying by the pool because I just did a lot of laps.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a part of the process. It's a part of the process.
You got to have some restorative time.
Yeah, I needed a little restorative time, and it actually helps me appreciate, like Sonora, my friend Sonora also said, she's like, you have a book coming out and a wedding to plan, and I wish I could go back and enjoy that process more.
Yeah.
And so that's what my book is called, Amplified Heart, an Emotional Discography. And it was written very, very slowly, like little writers. Like you don't just like take a week and do it. Like it was over 7 years.
I love that.
Started with little tiny like Facebook mini essays that I would like write where I did it for 1 month, and then they were seedlings. And I didn't even know, I kept telling myself I have a lot of material, but I don't have a book yet. And then a friend was like, hey, you should enter this contest about books about music, because it's about intimacy and music. It's each essay is one song and one person. And when I really looked back at it, I was further along than I remembered. And so again, just making the choice to think of it as a book, to think of it as done, and then letting other people help me with how done it was is what, and I have to say again, like my book story is also kind of like irritatingly awesome in that, like I'd taken all these workshops about how to write a query letter, how to do this, how to do that, how to find an agent. I'd been submitting individual essays for a couple of years, and every single one of them that I submitted was getting published. And so I submitted one and I got a response back, and they were like, it was about Devo and my sister. And they were like, we love this essay. And I was like, well, great. I was like, I have like a whole book of them if you want.
Wow.
And they said, actually, we do manuscripts too. We do full manuscripts. Send it to us.
Wow.
So I didn't even have the like steps that people told me I needed to take.
I love that. No, I love hearing that, because what I love to tell people is that life supports you when you take those steps, and we just have to take the step. And
you have to have been walking
and
maybe running,
but we don't have to do it all of ourselves, right? It's like sometimes we feel like you said, you feel like you have to do the hustle, but we don't. And I love, that's so beautiful. Can people, is it out now? Can people get the book?
How can we get it?
So it comes out May 5th, which is it comes out May 5th. The pre-ordering, I keep telling my editor, and she's like, it's a very small press. She's the only editor. She's like, I'm on it. I'm like, well, I do need, like, tell me when the pre-order is starting. But I think my first reading is at SU, actually. It's on Zoom, which I hate, but like on May 5th at 12:30. So check my social media. Like my Instagram is just Gribben Bryn. And then my Facebook is, I don't know how people find each other on Facebook anymore, but that's what they do.
We'll link it. We'll link it in the notes.
Link it. So May 5th is my first reading. I do intend to have a book launch party though in person on May 21st at Cafe Arta in Third Place Books, and there'll be more information about that. So
yay! Congratulations.
Thank you, Leslie.
Can people get it on Amazon, or
I think you'll be able to get it on Amazon. The press is Other Words Press.
Okay.
In Massachusetts, and I'm thinking that potentially you order through them. I think you can get it on Amazon, but I will give you more information about that. Like I've become a little bit of like the project manager for my editor, because again, I think she's a little overwhelmed too by herself. Like her staff, she's the primary editor. So I'm like, hey, can you give me a timeline on these things? But there will be a way to get this book. There will be a way to get this book.
Okay.
And if you're coming to my wedding, you can just buy my book as my wedding present.
Oh, I love it. Yes.
Should I put it on my registry?
Yes, do it. Well, it's been so great having you. Thank you so much for being our very first guest. We'll put links in the notes so that people can reach out to you and get your book. And we will see you next time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you are enjoying the podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave us a... what do you call it?
A review.
A review. Please leave us a review, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Flow into Authenticity is hosted by Esther Loopstra, Leslie Blumenstein, and me, Allison Henrich. Our original theme music is by James Wetzel. Podcast editing is by Dave Visaya. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Flow into Authenticity from your favorite podcast app.